The year is 2026. If you stand on a street corner in any major global metropolis, be it Los Angeles, London, or Tokyo, the soundtrack of the human experience has shifted into a different frequency. It is a world of whispers. The once jagged symphony of the city has been smoothed over by the low-frequency hum of lithium-ion batteries and the high-pitched, rhythmic tire slap of electric SUVs cruising through rain-slicked intersections. The automotive industry, once a grand theater of fire, noise, and mechanical rebellion, has finally surrendered. It has capitulated to the relentless, inevitable march of emission standards, ESG scores, and the sterile, cold efficiency of digitalization. The internal combustion engine is no longer a tool of passion. It has become a museum piece, a relic of a carbon-heavy past, a ghost of an era that the world is trying desperately to forget. But somewhere, tucked away in the shadows of a climate-controlled suburban garage or prowling the midnight stretches of an abandoned interstate, a different sound remains. It is a sound that, by all accounts, shouldn't exist anymore. It is a crude, indecent, rhythmic thumping, a mechanical heartbeat so powerful it makes the concrete vibrate and the air turn thick with the acrid, intoxicating smell of high-octane fuel and scorched rubber. It is the roar of a legend that, by every law of corporate logic, market expediency, and environmental science, should have vanished a decade ago. This is the story of a Dodge Challenger, a car that was too heavy to be a sports car, too old to be modern, and far too stubborn to follow the rules of a changing world. It was a machine built on a Frankenstein platform of the 1990s, with the aerodynamics of a limestone block and the grace of a sledgehammer. And yet, it became the ultimate symbol of the final resistance. This is the story of the muscle car that simply refused to die. To truly understand why the Challenger survived so long against impossible odds, we must look back at the wreckage of 2008. The American automotive industry was not just in a slump, it was in a death spiral. High gas prices and a global financial meltdown were systematically killing the Big Three in Detroit. It was during this dark, uncertain period that Dodge chose to launch the third-generation Challenger. At the time, the competition was looking toward the future. Ford was in the process of turning the Mustang into a global sports car with independent rear suspension and European-style handling. Chevrolet was readying a Camaro that looked like it belonged in a Michael Bay movie, sharp, futuristic, and surgical. Dodge, however, did something profoundly different, something that felt like a calculated risk. Led by designer Michael Castiglione, they didn't just hint at the past. They resurrected it in its most brutal form. They created a car that looked like a 1970 Challenger that had spent the last 40 years in an iron-walled gym on a steady diet of raw steel and protein shakes. But the real magic, or perhaps the real irony, was hidden beneath the metal. At the time, Chrysler was in a volatile, ill-fated marriage with Daimler, the parent company of Mercedes-Benz. Because Dodge lacked the massive budget required to develop a brand-new, lightweight chassis from scratch, they went raiding the Mercedes-Benz parts bin like mechanical scavengers. The Challenger's LC platform was a structural Frankenstein. It utilized the front suspension of a Mercedes W220 S-Class and the 5-link rear suspension of the W210 E-Class. Even the steering rack and the 5-speed automatic transmission were German in origin. Critics at the time were scathing. How can you build a modern American icon on the bones of a 1990s luxury sedan? They asked. They called it too wide, too heavy, and fundamentally obsolete the day it hit the showroom floor. But the critics missed the psychological point. Dodge wasn't building a scalpel for the Nürburgring. They were building a sledgehammer for the street. The Mercedes-derived platform gave the Challenger something no other muscle car had: a massive, cavernous interior and a highway ride quality so smooth it felt like it was floating on a cloud of gasoline. It was a car for grown-ups who wanted to look like outlaws. From 2008 to 2014, the Challenger existed in a strange limbo. It was the comfortable loser of the muscle car wars. The Mustang was getting faster every year, and the Camaro was winning trophies at the track, but the Challenger was winning in a different arena, the reality of daily life. It was the only muscle car that could fit 3 adults in the back seat and 2 sets of golf clubs in the trunk without a struggle. It was a cruiser, a grand tourer with a retro soul. However, in the world of high-performance brands, practicality is often a death sentence. By 2014, the Challenger was showing its age. The platform was nearly 15 years old, and the 5.7 and 6.4-liter Hemi engines, while powerful and soulful, were being outpaced by the turbocharged, high-tech European competition. Dodge was at a crossroad. They could either retire the car and build something small, aerodynamic, and electric, or they could do something so irresponsible, so gloriously insane, that would change car culture forever. They chose the path of madness. In late 2014, Dodge's SRT division was given a long leash and a dangerous mission. They didn't have the money for a new chassis, so they decided to compensate with pure, unmitigated, prehistoric power. They took the 6.2-liter V8 and did something unheard of for a production car at that price point. They strapped a 2.4-liter IHI twin-screw supercharger to the top of it. When Dodge finally leaked the power figure, 707 horsepower, the world thought it was a marketing gimmick or a typo in the press release. At the time, that was more power than a Lamborghini Aventador or a Ferrari 458. This was the Hellcat. It wasn't just a car. It was a cultural shockwave that reverberated through the industry. It changed the rules of the game overnight. Suddenly, Dodge wasn't a legacy brand struggling to stay relevant. It was the brand of the lunatic, the choice of the rebel. The Hellcat redefined what the Challenger could be. It turned the car's massive weight into a marketing asset. Dodge leaned into the heavy metal aesthetic. They stopped trying to make the car turn. They made it the undisputed king of the stoplight-to-stoplight war. The Hellcat became a meme, a status symbol, and the ultimate nightmare for any supercar owner who thought their $250,000 investment bought them immunity from a Dodge. To reach 707 horsepower and, more importantly, maintain a full factory warranty, Dodge's engineers had to engage in a level of technical over-engineering rarely seen in Detroit. Nearly 90% of the Hellcat's Hemi engine was unique compared to its naturally aspirated siblings. They used a forged steel crankshaft with induction-hardened bearing surfaces that could withstand the torque of a freight train. They used forged alloy pistons and powder-forged connecting rods. The cylinder heads were made of heat-treated aluminum alloy that could withstand the internal pressures of a small, contained star. But the real challenge wasn't making power, it was cooling. A supercharged V8 at full tilt generates enough heat to warm a small apartment building in the dead of winter. The Hellcat utilized a massive high-flow water pump and a dual-inlet air system. The most iconic piece of engineering was the air catcher headlamp. Engineers discovered that they needed more air than the grille could provide, so they hollowed out the inner driver's side headlight, turning it into a functional intake port that fed cold air directly into the airbox. The fuel system was equally absurd, a testament to the car's thirst for excess. At full throttle, the Hellcat's fuel pump could drain the 18.5-gallon tank in just 13 minutes. It consumed air at a rate of 30,000 liters per minute. This wasn't just an engine. It was a hungry, mechanical deity that demanded constant sacrifices in the form of premium gasoline and rear tires. It was the antithesis of the modern green movement, and the world loved it for its honesty. By 2017, the Hellcat had become the new normal. The shock had worn off, and the competition was starting to catch up. So, Dodge pushed the boundary even further into the realm of the impossible. They created the SRT Demon. This car was a direct middle finger to the entire industry's trend towards safety, sensibility, and autonomy. The Demon was the first production car in history capable of performing a wheelie on launch. It featured 840 horsepower when running on 100-octane race fuel. It came from a factory with only one seat, the driver's seat, though you could buy the others back for exactly $1. It was the first car to be banned by the NHRA, because it was too fast for a production vehicle without a professional roll cage, running a 9.65-second quarter mile at over 140 miles per hour. The technical highlight of the Demon, however, was the SRT power chiller. Dodge engineers realized that heat was the primary enemy of air density. They created a system that diverted the car's air, conditioning refrigerant away from the cabin and into a heat exchanger that chilled the liquid for the supercharger's intercoolers. You could sit in a cold cabin while the car's mechanical brain lowered the intake air temperature by 45 degrees Fahrenheit, ensuring maximum boom when the lights turned green. It was a masterstroke of engineering, born on drag strips and grease-stained gas stations, not in a sterile, white-walled environmental office. Why did the Challenger survive 15 years on the same platform, while the Camaro and Mustang went through multiple, expensive generations? The answer is a single word: honesty. In an era where cars were becoming smartphones on wheels, the Challenger remained refreshingly, almost aggressively, analog. While other manufacturers were moving to electric power steering that felt like a disconnected video game, the Challenger's hydraulic-assisted rack still had weight, kickback, and vibration. While others were piping fake, synthesized engine noise through the speakers to compensate for small engines, the Challenger's scream was 100% organic, the sound of air being violently compressed and exploded. Dodge realized they were selling an experience, not a set of specifications. They sold wide-body kits to give the car the stance of a prehistoric predator. They sold the jailbreak editions to allow for endless, vibrant customization. They sold the Red Eye, which was essentially a Hellcat with a demon's heart. Dodge turned the Challenger into a cast-iron skillet. It was an old design, yes, but it never lost its seasoning. They made being old-fashioned the coolest thing on the road, a badge of honor for those who refused to go quietly into the electric night. By 2023, the walls were finally closing in. Global mandates, corporate fleet averages, and the undeniable push for electrification made the Hemi V8 an endangered species. Dodge didn't go out with a whimper or a polite press release. They went out with a supernova of noise and fire. They announced the Last Call series, 7 final special editions designed to honor the car's chaotic legacy. The final act was the Challenger SRT Demon 170. This was the ultimate expression of the LC platform's potential. On E85 ethanol fuel, it produced a terrifying 1,025 horsepower. It could reach 60 miles per hour in a staggering 1.66 seconds, faster than a multi-million-dollar Bugatti Chiron or a Tesla Model S Plaid. It was the loudest, most violent, and most unnecessary car ever built by a major manufacturer. It was a 1,000 horsepower love letter to the era of internal combustion, a final, defiant roar before the lights went out. When the last Challenger finally rolled off the assembly line in Brampton, Ontario, in late 2023, it felt less like a factory closing and more like the end of a civilization. The era of the big block, rear-wheel drive American dinosaur was officially over. Dodge has since replaced it with the electric Charger Daytona, trying to mimic the rumble with fratsonic chambers and high-tech speakers. But car enthusiasts know the truth. You can record the sound of thunderstorm, and you can play it back through the best speakers in the world, but you can't record the way the lightning makes your skin crawl and your heart skip a beat. Standing here in 2026, we see the Challenger for what it truly was. It wasn't just a car. It was a monument to an era when car creators were more important than marketers. It was a machine for the outsiders, for those who refused to follow the general rules of efficiency, compactness, and logic. The Challenger lost the war against progress. Progress is a slow, relentless, and unfeeling wave that eventually drowns everything in its path. But the Challenger won something much more valuable. It won immortality in the human spirit. It became the global benchmark of what an American car should be: big, loud, unapologetically overpowered, and absolutely unconquerable in its soul. It reached for the stars not by using active aerodynamics, complex hybrid motors, or carbon fiber tub construction, but by leaning on the raw, primeval force of 8 cylinders and a massive blower. And though the Brampton plant is now quiet, and the streets are filled with the hum of electric motors, the echo of the Hellcat will be heard for a very long time. Because legends that refuse to die so stubbornly usually end up living forever in the memories of those who once felt that violent kick in the spine at launch, and that smell of burning rubber that for a few brief moments felt exactly like freedom.